My name is Clara, and the night Alpha Conrad shredded through our fortress gates is permanently burned into my memory. His jaw dripped with the remains of the guards who tried to conceal his Luna's cruelty toward me, staining the moonlit snow a pitch, unnatural black. But to understand that massacre, I need to start from the beginning. I was not born a slave, but in the harsh winters of the Oakhaven Valley, debt is a chain heavier than any forged iron. My mother, Abigail, owed her life to the previous alpha of the Blackwood Pack. When the winter fever took her lungs, her debt transferred to me. I was 14 when I first stepped into the grand, imposing stone halls of Blackwood Keep, assigned to the personal retinue of the newly anointed Luna, Genevieve. To the outside world, Genevieve of the Silverpine Pack was a vision of benevolence. She had hair the color of spun moonlight and eyes like fractured ice. When she walked through the lower village, distributing bread to the orphaned pups or smiling at the elders, the pack murmured about how blessed Alpha Conrad was to have found such a gracious mate. But behind the heavy oak doors of the Alpha's estate, Genevieve was a monster clothed in silk. Conrad was a wartime Alpha, a man carved from duty and bloodshed. He spent 9 months out of the year patrolling the treacherous northern borders, fending off rogue factions and rival warlords. His marriage to Genevieve had been a political alliance, a union arranged by Lord Frederick of Silverpine to merge their territories. They bore the mark of a mated pair, but it was a bond forged by a ceremonial bite, not by the true alignment of souls. Genevieve despised him for his coldness, and she took that bitter, festering resentment out on the only person who could never fight back, me. The abuse did not begin with blades. It started with agonizing, psychological cruelty. If her bathwater was a fraction too cold, she would force me to stand outside in the freezing courtyard for hours without a cloak. If I looked at her directly in the eyes, she would have old Silas, the head cook, deny me rations for 3 days. But as the years bled on and her husband remained distant, her cruelty sharpened into physical violence. The first permanent scar was given to me on the eve of my 19th birthday. Genevieve had received a missive from Conrad stating he would be delayed at the border for another 2 moons. Infuriated, she had swept her entire vanity to the floor, shattering crystal perfume bottles and silver-backed mirrors. I knelt immediately, cutting my hands as I scrambled to pick up the shards. "You are too slow, Clara," she hissed, her voice a terrifyingly soft purr. She grabbed a pair of iron curling tongs that had been resting in the hearth fire. Before I could even register the movement, she pressed the glowing hot iron directly into the back of my left shoulder. The scream that tore from my throat was muffled only by the heavy velvet tapestries of her bedchamber. The smell of my own burning flesh filled the room, a sickeningly sweet odor that made my stomach heave. "A reminder," she whispered, her breath brushing my ear as I writhed on the floor, "that your pain is the only thing in this keep over which I have absolute control." I was sent to Maester William, the pack's aging healer. When he saw the burn, his eyes flickered with pity, but he looked away, wrapping it in silence. Everyone in the keep knew. The chambermaids, the guards, the stable boys. They all saw the bruises blooming on my jaw, the limp in my step, the way I flinched when a door slammed. But Genevieve was the Luna. In the strict, unyielding hierarchy of werewolf law, to speak against the Luna was treason, punishable by exile or death. And so, I endured. I became a ghost in my own life, navigating the stone corridors with my head bowed, hiding a map of jagged, silvery scars beneath the thick wool of my high-collared servant dresses. I convinced myself this was simply my lot in life. I convinced myself that the Alpha, when he was home, was too blinded by his duties to notice a lowly human servant. I was wrong. The cracks in Genevieve's perfect facade were already forming, and the winter solstice would bring them all crashing down. The Winter Solstice Festival was the most important event of the year in Oakhaven. It marked the end of the warring season, and for the first time in 3 years, Alpha Conrad was returning home to stay for the entire winter. The keep was in a frenzy of preparation. Garlands of frosted pine and dried blood oranges were strung from the iron chandeliers. The scent of roasting meats and spiced wine masked the damp, metallic smell of the dungeons below. Genevieve was manic. She demanded perfection, desperate to present the image of a thriving, joyful household to her returning husband. For me, her mania translated to unrelenting torture. 3 days before Conrad's return, I was tasked with fetching a rare vintage of blackberry wine from the deepest part of the cellars. The torches were unlit, casting long, wavering shadows across the damp stone. As I rounded a corner near the old armory, I heard hushed voices, I pressed my back against the cold wall, holding my breath. It was Genevieve, and she was not alone. "He suspects nothing," a male voice murmured. I recognized the arrogant drawl immediately. It was Lord Frederick, Genevieve's cousin, a man who had long coveted the rich hunting grounds of Blackwood. "Conrad's forces are depleted from the northern skirmishes. When the spring thaw comes, my men will be in position. You only need to ensure the keep's gates are lightly guarded on the night of the eclipse. And in return, I am rid of this frozen wasteland and that brute of a husband," Genevieve replied, her tone laced with venom. "I will be the Luna of the United Territories, Frederick. Do not forget our bargain." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Treason. The Luna was plotting the downfall of the Blackwood pack. I took a slow, trembling step backward, desperate to escape, but my foot caught the edge of a loose stone. My leather shoe scraped against the floor, a sound no louder than a mouse, but to werewolf ears it was a thunderclap. The voices stopped instantly. "Who is there?" Frederick barked. I turned and ran, abandoning the wine, my lungs burning as I sprinted up the spiral stone stairs. I made it to the servant quarters and buried myself under my thin blankets, trembling so violently the entire cot shook. An hour later, the heavy wooden door to my quarters was kicked open. 2 of Genevieve's loyal guards dragged me from my bed by my hair, hauling me to the Luna's private chambers. Genevieve stood by the roaring fire, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly, feral snarl. Frederick was gone. "You always were a quiet creature, Clara," she said softly, dismissing the guards and locking the door behind them, a little mouse scuttling in the walls. But mice who hear things they shouldn't, they get their tails caught in the trap. "I heard nothing, my lady," I sobbed, pressing my forehead to the stone floor. "I swear it on my mother's grave." "Liar," she hissed. What followed was a blur of agonizing pain. She didn't use an iron this time. She used a riding crop laced with silver threads, a weapon designed to discipline unruly wolves, but highly lethal and excruciatingly painful to human flesh. She struck my back again and again, tearing through the thin linen of my nightgown until I was gasping for air, choking on my own blood. "If you ever breathe a word of what you think you heard," Genevieve panted, standing over my bleeding form, "I will not just kill you. I will have old Silas flayed alive. I will burn Maester William's apothecary to the ground with him inside it. Do you understand me?" "Yes," I managed to whisper, the word tasting of copper. She left me there on the floor. It took me 3 hours to drag myself back to my quarters. I couldn't go to the healer. I had to stitch the deepest gashes on my back myself, using a needle and coarse linen thread by the light of a single candle. The fever set in the next morning. Despite the infection raging in my blood, Genevieve forced me to work the solstice feast. I wore a dress with a stiff, high collar and long sleeves, the thick, dark wool hiding the bandages and the blood seeping through them. Every step was a battle against unconsciousness. The great hall was deafeningly loud. 100 warriors drank and slammed their tankards against the long oaken tables. At the head table sat Alpha Conrad. He was a terrifyingly massive man, radiating a raw, untamed power that made the air around him crackle. He had dark, shoulder-length hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He sat rigidly beside Genevieve, his expression unreadable as she placed a delicate hand on his arm, playing the part of the doting wife to perfection. I was tasked with refilling his goblet. My hands shook as I approached the dais. The heat of the roaring fireplaces was exacerbating my fever. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and my vision blurred at the edges. As I leaned forward to pour the spiced wine into Conrad's silver cup, my torn back screamed in protest. A sudden, sharp spasm of pain racked my spine, and my hand jerked. A splash of dark red wine spilled over the rim, staining the Alpha's heavy fur mantle. The hall went dead silent. Genevieve's face drained of color, her eyes flashing with a promise of death. "Forgive me, Alpha," I rasped, dropping to my knees. The movement tore the stitches in my back. I felt a hot, fresh rush of blood soak into the bandages beneath my dress. Conrad didn't yell. He didn't strike me. He slowly turned his head, his storm cloud eyes locking onto my face. For the first time in 5 years, the Alpha truly looked at me. His nostrils flared, taking in a sharp breath. Werewolves had an acute sense of smell, and beneath the heavy scent of roasted meat and spilled wine, he caught it. The sharp, metallic tang of fresh, infected human blood. "You are bleeding," Conrad rumbled, his voice so deep it vibrated in my chest. "It is nothing, my lord," Genevieve intervened quickly, her voice tight and slightly panicked. The clumsy girl cut her hand in the kitchens earlier. "Leave us, Clara. Go clean yourself up." I scrambled to my feet, desperate to escape before the Alpha could press the issue. But as I turned to flee, a wave of profound dizziness washed over me. The room tilted violently. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against the edge of the stone dais. As I fell, the heavy silver clasp at the back of my collar snagged on the sharp corner of Conrad's carved oak chair. With a sickening rip, the thick woolen fabric of my dress tore violently down the back, exposing the ruined, blood-soaked bandages beneath. I hit the floor, gasping in pain, expecting the immediate wrath of the Luna. But what followed was not Genevieve's fury. It was a low, terrifying growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of Blackwood Keep. The great hall of Blackwood Keep, moments before filled with the raucous laughter of 100 battle-hardened warriors, plunged into a silence so profound it was suffocating. The low, terrifying growl that had ripped from Alpha Conrad's chest did not sound like a man. It was the primordial, earth-shattering sound of a beast recognizing a threat inside its own den. I lay frozen on the cold stone floor, my breath hitching in my throat as the freezing draft of the hall bit into my exposed, mutilated flesh. "Conrad, please!" Genevieve's voice broke the silence, though it lacked its usual imperious edge. It trembled, thin and reedy. "The girl is a clumsy fool. She tripped on her own hem. I will have the guards remove her to the dungeons for ruining your mantle." Silence. The command was not shouted. It was a guttural vibration that rolled through the room, heavy with the oppressive weight of the Alpha command. Every werewolf in the hall, from the lowest-ranking pup to Commander Reynolds at the high table, involuntarily bowed their heads, their spines snapping rigidly straight. Even Genevieve flinched, her perfect porcelain features twisting in sudden terror. Conrad did not look at her. He stepped off the dais, his heavy boots echoing like war drums against the stone. He knelt beside me. Up close, the sheer size of him was overwhelming. His broad shoulders blocked out the light of the hearth, casting me in his shadow. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting him to drag me away, expecting the final killing blow for daring to bleed in his presence. Instead, I felt a warmth entirely unlike the searing heat of Genevieve's irons. It was his large, calloused hand, hovering mere inches from my ruined back. He wasn't touching me, but I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding against his leather tunic. His eyes, usually a calm storm cloud gray, were rapidly bleeding into a terrifying, luminescent gold, the true mark of his wolf pushing to the surface. "Silver," he whispered, the word sharp and deadly. "There is silver in these wounds, and old burns, puckered flesh." He slowly reached out, his fingertips grazing the tattered, blood-soaked edge of my woolen dress. With a single, fluid motion, he ripped the heavy fabric down to my waist. The collective gasp from the warriors in the hall was audible. Stripped of its hiding place, my back was a grotesque tapestry of survival. There was the raised, star-shaped burn from the curling iron on my shoulder, surrounded by a lattice of purple bruises, old yellowing welts, and the fresh, weeping gashes from the silver-laced riding crop that were currently oozing dark, infected blood. Who did this? Conrad's voice was dangerously quiet. I was paralyzed. If I spoke, Genevieve would kill old Silas. She would burn Maester William in his apothecary. I kept my face pressed to the stone, hot tears finally spilling over my cheeks, mixing with the dust. "Alpha," Genevieve tried again, stepping off the dais, her silk skirts rustling. "She is a servant. She gets into brawls in the lower village." Conrad moved faster than human eyes could track. 1 second he was kneeling beside me, and the next, he was standing, his hand wrapped firmly around Genevieve's throat, lifting her a full foot off the ground. The Luna of Blackwood Keep kicked her legs frantically, her hands clawing at his iron grip. "Do not insult my intelligence, mate," he snarled, the word dripping with venomous sarcasm. "No peasant brawl leaves the burn of a noble's iron, or the precise, measured lashes of a silver training whip." He dropped her without warning. Genevieve crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, her crown of spun moonlight hair falling into disarray. Conrad turned his back to her. He knelt beside me once more, sliding his massive arms beneath my knees and my shoulders. He lifted me effortlessly against his chest, careful not to let his armor press into my back. "Commander Reynolds," Conrad barked over his shoulder. A scarred, burly wolf stepped forward instantly, his fist over his heart. "Yes, Alpha. Confine the Luna to her chambers, Post 4 of your most trusted men at her door. If she attempts to leave, break her legs." Genevieve shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and panic, but 2 guards were already hauling her up by her arms. "Maester William," Conrad continued, his golden eyes scanning the crowd until he found the aging healer. "To my private chambers." Now, he carried me out of the great hall. I had never been in the Alpha's wing of the keep. It was warmer here, the air smelling of cedarwood and sharp winter pine instead of damp stone and fear. He kicked open the heavy oak doors of his bedchamber and gently laid me face down on his massive, fur-covered bed. The pelts were incredibly soft against my burning skin. Maester William arrived moments later, breathless and carrying his leather satchel of salves and tinctures. When he saw me on the Alpha's bed, his eyes widened, but he immediately set to work. As the healer cleaned the infected wounds with a stinging antiseptic, Conrad stood by the roaring fireplace, his hands gripping the stone mantle so tightly the rock began to crack under his fingers. "I swore an oath to protect everyone beneath my roof," Conrad said to the fire, his voice hollow with a profound, sickening guilt. "How long, William?" The healer hesitated, his hands trembling as he threaded a needle. "Alpha, I..." "Tell him, William," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper. The pain was receding into a dull throb, replaced by a strange, floating exhaustion. "Or she will kill you." Conrad turned around, his golden eyes fixing on me. He walked over to the bed, pulling a wooden chair close and sitting down. "No one will touch him, Clara. Nor old Silas. I know she threatened them to buy your silence. I can smell the terror on you when you think of them." He knew. He was piecing it together with terrifying speed. "Years," Maester William finally confessed, his voice breaking. "Since you first married her, Alpha. She restricted the girl's rations, left her in the freezing courtyards. Then came the burns. Then the beatings. The Luna invoked pack law. She said if I spoke against her to you, she would claim treason and have my head on a spike before you ever returned from the borders." Conrad closed his eyes. A muscle feathered in his jaw. The sheer, feral rage radiating off him was making the air in the room thick and difficult to breathe. He had been fighting wars in the frozen north to keep his people safe, completely blind to the monster torturing a defenseless human girl in his own home. "I will kill her," Conrad stated, matter-of-factly. "Alpha, wait." I pushed myself up slightly on my elbows, fighting the dizziness. "The beatings, they aren't the worst of it." Conrad leaned forward, his massive hand gently brushing a stray lock of sweaty hair from my forehead. The touch was so tender it made my chest ache. "What could be worse than what she has done to you, little bird?" I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. 3 days ago, I was in the deep cellars fetching wine. I heard her speaking with Lord Frederick of Silverpine. Conrad went absolutely rigid. "Frederick is supposed to be in the capital. He is here, Alpha. Or, his men are. They made a bargain. She said your forces were depleted from the northern skirmishes. She promised to ensure the keep's gates were lightly guarded. In return, Frederick takes Blackwood, and she becomes the Luna of the United Territories." I watched the realization wash over him, cold and calculating. "When?" Conrad asked, his tone shifting from a furious husband to a warlord. "When did they plan to strike?" "She mentioned the spring thaw," I said, my brow furrowing as I tried to remember the exact words. But Frederick said no. He said tonight, during the solstice eclipse." Conrad's head snapped toward the grand window of his chamber. The moon, usually a brilliant, heavy silver orb over the mountains, was already beginning to darken at the edges. The eclipse was starting. "The blackberry wine," I gasped, a sudden, horrifying realization hitting me. "The vintage she sent me to fetch. She told old Silas it was a special gift for the gate guards to celebrate the solstice. She ordered him to distribute it an hour ago." Conrad stood up, the chair scraping violently against the floor. "Wolfsbane," he deduced grimly. "She is poisoning my outer guard." The keep erupted into organized chaos. Alpha Conrad did not panic. He was a creature forged in the crucible of border wars. He issued commands with terrifying precision. Maester William was ordered to lock the heavy oak doors to the Alpha's chambers from the inside, commanded to protect me with his life. Through the thick wood, I listened to the muffled shouts, the harsh clanking of armor, and the heavy, synchronized thud of werewolf boots rushing down the stone corridors. Outside the grand window, the moon was slowly swallowed by shadows. The solstice eclipse plunged the Oakhaven Valley into pitch blackness. I dragged myself from the bed, wrapping one of Conrad's heavy fur cloaks around my trembling shoulders. Fighting the agonizing sting in my back, I hobbled to the glass to look down at the southern courtyard below. Lord Frederick's forces advanced silently through the knee-deep snow, their silver-edged weapons catching the sparse torchlight. They moved with the confidence of men expecting to find the Blackwood sentries unconscious, choking on their own blood from the wolfsbane-laced blackberry wine. Instead, as Frederick's vanguard breached the heavy iron portcullis, the courtyard suddenly blazed. 100 torches flared to life on the battlements. Conrad stood at the dead center of the yard. Flanking him were Commander Reynolds and 50 of the most vicious, battle-hardened lichens of the Blackwood pack. They hadn't touched a single drop of the wine. Frederick, a tall, arrogant man, halted his men, his expression shattering into terror as he looked up and met the Alpha's storm-cloud eyes. "Treason is a foul thing, Frederick." Conrad's voice boomed across the frozen courtyard, easily cutting through the howling winter wind. "But cowardice is worse. Trying to steal a man's home while he feasts? Your time is over, Conrad," Frederick shouted back, unsheathing a long broadsword, though his hands shook visibly. "Your pack is weak." Genevieve recognized a true alpha when she saw one. "Then let us see if you bleed like a true alpha," Conrad roared. The battle was not a skirmish. It was an absolute slaughter. As the two sides crashed into each other, the Alpha of Blackwood dropped to his hands and knees. The sound of his bones breaking and rapidly reforming was a sickening crunch that echoed up to my window. In mere seconds, a nightmare of muscle, midnight black fur, and razor-sharp claws stood where the man had been. Conrad's wolf form was monstrous, easily standing 8 feet tall. He tore through Frederick's ranks like a scythe through dry wheat, his jaws snapping armor and bone with equal ease. The pristine white courtyard was quickly painted in dark, violent splatters. The Blackwood Guard fought with a terrifying, zealous fury, emboldened by their alpha. The Silver Pine forces broke within minutes, dropping their weapons into the bloody slush. Down in the Great Hall, a different kind of judgment awaited. By the time Maester William deemed me stable enough to descend the stairs, leaning heavily on his arm and wearing a clean linen tunic, Conrad had shifted back to his human form. He was covered in blood, breathing heavily as he ordered Genevieve dragged into the center of the room. The entire pack gathered, silent and intensely watchful. Genevieve was no longer the picture of aristocratic grace. Her spun moonlight hair was matted, her silk dress ruined, her face stained with panicked tears. When she saw me standing near the staircase, her eyes flashed with a dying, venomous ember of hatred. "You plotted against your alpha." Conrad's voice was devoid of all emotion, a cold, empty void, far more terrifying than his feral rage. "You poisoned my guards. You conspired with an enemy to slaughter your own pack." "I did it for us!" Genevieve screamed, thrashing violently against the guards holding her arms. "You care more about your frozen borders than your own mate. You gave me nothing." "I gave you my name and my protection," Conrad replied, stepping closer, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over her. "And in return, you brought betrayal to my doorstep. And worse." He turned his gaze toward me, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second before hardening back into steel. "You tortured an innocent under my roof. You dishonored the sacred title of Luna. Pack law for treason dictated execution." But Conrad understood that some fates were far worse than a quick death. "I, Conrad of the Blackwood Pack, sever this bond," he boomed. He reached out and clamped his blood-stained hand over her shoulder, right over the ceremonial mating mark. Genevieve shrieked in absolute agony as the spiritual tether was violently ripped apart. The mark on her neck burned an angry, blistered red before fading into a sickly, dead white scar. "You are stripped of your title and your pack," Conrad decreed. "You will be cast out of the northern gates with nothing but the clothes on your back. If any wolf of Blackwood sees you within our territory, they will hunt you down." Banishment into the Oakhaven wilderness in the dead of winter was a guaranteed, agonizingly slow death by exposure. Genevieve sobbed, begging for mercy, but the guards dragged her away. Her wails echoed down the corridors until the heavy iron gates slammed shut, sealing her fate in the blizzard. Silence fell over the great hall. The rot had been violently cut away from the heart of the pack. Conrad dismissed his warriors to secure the perimeter. He walked slowly across the hall, ignoring the blood drying on his skin, and stopped at the base of the stairs where I stood trembling. The fierce warlord was gone, replaced by a man carrying a heavy sorrow. "I cannot erase the years you suffered in the dark, Clara," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gently framing my face, his thumbs wiping away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "But I swear to you on my life, my soul, and my wolf, you will never know pain in this keep again." I leaned into his touch, the warmth of his hands chasing away the cold that had settled in my bones for 5 long years. "I know, Alpha," I whispered. "Conrad," he corrected gently, a small, genuine smile breaking through the harsh lines of his blood-spattered face. "Just Conrad." The winter blood washed away with the spring thaw, leaving Blackwood Keep forever changed. I am no longer a silent servant hiding in cold shadows, nor the terrified victim of a cruel, false Luna. Conrad claimed me, not through force, but with a gentle, enduring patience that healed my deepest scars. Now, as the true Luna of the pack, I rule with kindness, standing proudly beside my fiercely protective Alpha.